President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We would like to now hand over to the prosecution to continue putting questions to the witness.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just before I resume my questions, before we started this morning, one of the Chamber's greffier clerk informed me that Mr. Rokoff's photographs here in town had been damaged and asked our office to contact DC Cam to see if they had any copies of Mr. Rokoff's photographs. We've done that, and I understand an electronic file has been sent to us. I have not looked at it to see whether they are, in fact, different photographs than what already exist on the case file. But as we were asked to do this, we will circulate to the Chamber and to all the parties this electronic file. At lunchtime, I will look through it and see if there are any different or new photos of Mr. Rokoff's. And if so, we'll advise the court after lunch. But I wanted to immediately inform the parties in Chamber of this. Mr. Rokoff, resuming our questioning, you indicated earlier that initially there was a positive mood in the city, but that at some point the mood changed. Can you tell us when it was that the mood in the city changed and what you meant by that, how the mood changed?
Around midday, people started leaving the city, going out towards the edge. The word going around was, and also being put out by cadre with loudspeakers, is you have to leave the city, the Americans are going to bomb. Also, the mood changed considerably for me that day after the incident at the Phuket Milia Hospital, where John Swain, Sidney Schonberg, Dith Prawn, and myself were taken by Khmer Rouge down to the river.
I will get to that shortly. Did there come a point in the day where you observed whether there was any looting going on by Khmer Rouge forces in the city?
If there was, I did not witness it personally.
Based on what you observed, did you see whether Khmer Rouge forces were attempting to protect and preserve the homes, businesses, and property of the residents of Phnom Penh?
I cannot say that I saw that myself. An incident was related to me during my time in the French embassy by an Austrian cinematographer, Christophe Marie Froda. And he took 16 millimeter movie film, and one of the frames of his movie film, the rights was purchased by Associated Press, and it is a photograph showing Khmer Rouge cadre with a .45 caliber pistol in his hand. He had just fired it, and Christophe said he was trying to get the people to move on, the Khmer Rouge to not go into a store. Whether that was looting or not, I can't say. But he did not fire at anybody. And Christophe's film, that one frame, became one of the most published photographs of the fall of Phnom Penh. But no, I did not see any looting myself.
I want to turn now to your trip to the Phuket Malay Hospital that you mentioned. Can you tell us first approximately what time it was that you went there and why it was that you decided to go to the hospital?
I am not sure what time. I did not have a watch. I'm also very bad at keeping notes or captions for photos. But the reason I went to the hospital is, as I related earlier, I was leaving the intersection of Monivong and Sihanouk, and a Peugeot, white Peugeot, stopped, and I got a ride with a person who worked at the Phuket Melia Hospital. He was still in his hospital uniform. And he seemed extremely nervous, and even more so when he realized I was an American. And he told me the Khmer Rouge were emptying the hospital. Everybody had to leave work. So I got off by the Royale, saw Dith Prawn, Sydney, John Swain. We went down to the hospital, went into one of the buildings. There were bodies on the floor, blood everywhere. Easy to slip on the blood. It was wet. There were many wounded. There was a Khmer Rouge cadre in a truck outside who had just lost an eye to shrapnel. I photographed him outside. Then went inside, and one of the French doctors was working on him. And then I went out the building, and the Khmer Rouge came into the front of the hospital. The next 5 minutes were very intense. They were asking Dith Prawn questions. I cannot speak Khmer, so I don't know what was transpiring. They tried to get him to go away. He refused. He stuck with us. A Khmer Rouge with a pistol put it to my head. The two behind me moved aside, I guess so they would not get splattered. And next thing, we were told to get into this armored personnel carrier, which formerly was a Law Nol Force armored personnel carrier. A government driver was in it. They put us in the APC. We drove maybe, it's hard to say how far because the hatches were shut. It was dark. Could have gone maybe a kilometer, stopped, and they threw a naval officer in who was very nervous. He threw his wallet under the bench behind some ammunition cans. He was very, very nervous. We rode around for a few minutes, and eventually the APC stopped. It seems to have turned maybe 90 degrees or whatever on its tracks and backed up. The rear hatch opened, and the bright light comes shining in, and we see the river. We are told to go stand under the remains of the Japanese bridge, and the Cambodian naval officer was led away. Whatever happened to him did not occur in my presence. We were detained there for maybe an hour. I'm sorry, I can't tell you approximately because it's hard to get a handle on the flow of time in a situation like that. We were detained for a while. You could see many, many people streaming past. It was picking up. The pace of people leaving was picking up. About an hour after being detained, we were told to go to the Ministry of Information. There was a truck. We were taken there.
If I can stop you
Yes.
there, we'll get to the Ministry of Information. I'd like to go back now and ask you a few more questions about this incident in which you were taken away from the hospital. First of all, can you describe for us the people that took you into custody and put you into the armed carrier? Who were those people?
Khmer Rouge.
How many Khmer Rouge were there?
In the immediate vicinity of us, few journalists, I would say a good half dozen. When we were taken out the front gate to the APC, there were a number of Khmer Rouge on the street. I could not really give you an estimate. But there were about half a dozen with a group that took us and put us in the APC.
And who, at the hospital, who was in your group that was taken into custody by the Khmer Rouge along with yourself?
Myself, Sidney Schonbert, Dith Prawn, who worked for Sidney Schonbert, and John Swain. The driver also. Sidney's driver. I believe his name was Sarun.
And when you were first detained, did the Khmer Rouge want to take all four of you, or were they interested more in only some of your group?
Probably Dith Prawn, repeatedly telling them we were French journalists there to cover the victory, may have helped in them not separating us. It wasn't until a week later that the Khmer Rouge wanted the Americans separated from the rest of the people in the French embassy. But that day in the hospital and also the Japanese bridge, we were not separated. They were trying to get Dith Prawn to leave, and he would not leave.
I want to make a reference, read to you an excerpt from John Swain's journal of this event, which is a document E3/51, E3/51. The page references are English S00003278, Khmer S00644706 through 644707, and French 00597834. And in his journal describing the events that occurred there, he makes the following statement, Mr. Swain, quote, Mr. Prawn explained that the Khmer Rouge had told him he was free to go, that they were only after the rich and the bourgeoisie, end of quote. Does this refresh your recollection? Do you recall Mr. Prawn, Dith Prawn, explaining at some point why the Khmer Rouge were taking you into custody?
It was never explained to me why we were being taken into custody. I thought it was pretty obvious to myself, though.
And you indicated that one of the Khmer Rouge soldiers pointed a gun at you. What type of gun?
Well, it was very small caliber because I could look at the bore, the barrel, and it was a revolver, and I could not identify the type. It was not a military handgun that I recognized. It was a revolver in small caliber.
How close was he when he pointed the gun at you?
Well, he was maybe 3 feet away, and then when his arm reached out, the gun was very close.
Did the Khmer Rouge soldiers who took you into custody, did they have a commander?
I could not ascertain who was in charge, but somebody made the decisions and the decision to put us into the vehicle. And then later at the bridge, when we were released and told to go to the Ministry of Information, somebody must have been in communication with higher up. That was my assumption.
And while you were in custody, were any questions asked of yourself or Mr. Swain or Mr. Schanberg by the Khmer Rouge soldiers?
There was no intense questioning going on. The conversation was between Dith Pran and the Khmer Rouge. I'm not in a position to understand what was being discussed. Sydney stated that he's telling them we're French journalists to cover the victory. He told me that rather quietly, just so I would catch on. Just like Sydney got very upset and nervous when we're in the APC and I started talking in English, and he says, "Don't speak English, you're French." So the hour under the bridge, no interrogation, no nothing. They were satisfied we were journalists and I guess waited for word on what to do. In the meantime, they took an interest in what was in our bags or what was in Sydney's bag. They rummaged through his bag. One Khmer Rouge held up a big wad of $100 bills in one hand and Sydney's underwear in the other. He put the money back in the blue handbag and kept the underwear. I guess the money had no value at that time to him. And I was worried they would be going through my camera bag next, and then we were told to get on the truck. I had my camera equipment and film I had shot with me. I was very fortunate because if it was not returned to me, it would have been all for nothing.
Do you recall whether the Khmer Rouge who took you into custody, whether they attempted to learn whether any of you were Americans?
If they asked Dith Pran these questions, I'm not aware. And I did not speak English in front of them. It's that simple.
You mentioned that after you were put into the armed carrier and transported, that there was another prisoner, someone who you indicated was from the Navy. When was it that he joined or was put in custody with you?
Upon leaving the Praket Milia Hospital in the armored personnel carrier, we drove, and I couldn't tell you exactly where to because the hatches were closed, could not see out in any way. And maybe 5 minutes after leaving the hospital, this Khmer naval officer was thrown in. He was physically shoved into the APC. And as I said, he immediately took his wallet and maybe his ID was in it, and he threw it under the seat. He got rid of it.
How did you know that he was a naval officer?
Because he failed to take his uniform off that morning.
And you've described how you were taken to the riverfront. Were there more Khmer Rouge soldiers who met you when you arrived at the location at the riverfront near the Japanese bridge?
Yes, I could not give you an approximate number, but there were a number of Khmer Rouge there, just as all along the river, at regular intervals, were Khmer Rouge. I would say in excess of 24 Khmer Rouge in the immediate vicinity.
Mr. Rokoff, as it has been a long time since these events, I want to read another excerpt from John Swain's journal to give you a chance to respond to this. Mr. President, this is document E3/51, and the page references are English S0003278, Khmer S00644707, and French 00597834. And this is regarding the time that the naval prisoner that you mentioned was added to your carrier. Quote, "We rode through the streets, then stopped and picked up 2 more prisoners, Cambodians in civilian clothes. The big one with a mustache and crew cut wore a white T-shirt and jeans. The smaller man was clad in a sports shirt and slacks. Both were officers and quite as frightened as we were. The big man we recognized as the second in command of the Navy," end of quote. And I read this to you to refresh your recollection. What we want to hear from you today is your best recollection of events. Having heard this, does that refresh your recollection as to the number of law and NOL officers who were picked up on your trip, and as to how they appeared when they were taken into the carrier?
I remember the one officer who put his wallet under the seat. The second, I'm not sure. I'm hazy on that point. I was focused on the one guy sitting directly across from me and what he was doing. And he had, I was sure he was military, but regarding having the full uniform shirt on, no. Pants and shoes and T-shirt. But I did not know how high-ranking he was. I don't know if Dith Pran was able to identify him. You say third or fourth ranking person, but I'm bad on names.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Rokoff. And you indicated that while you were being detained by the Japanese bridge, that you started to see more people leaving the city. Were you able to observe at any time during the day whether or not the Khmer Rouge were using force or using threats in order to ensure and force people to leave the city?
I did not see force used regarding these people who were leaving the city.
Did you hear from any people as to whether or not the Khmer Rouge were using force to evacuate the city?
I heard a number of accounts of that happening that evening as we connect with other foreigners who sought refuge in the French embassy on the 17th. not the ones who were in the French embassy, to include some journalists who were there before the 17th. They would not have witnessed that. There were some people who came in, most notably some of the ethnic Pakistanis who lived here, many who went out on the highways, Highway 5 headed north, and then 2 or 3 days later would be sent back to Phnom Penh to go to the French embassy. And they were giving some of the first reports of killings out on the road, being forced out, the separation of families, segregation into male, female. These were the first eyewitness accounts that some of us journalists had heard of this. But on the day of the 17th, none of this was apparent to me in Phnom Penh.
Thank you. Now, you indicated that at some point you were released by the Khmer Rouge from the riverfront, and that you then went to the Ministry of Information. And I'd like now to turn to the events that you witnessed at the Ministry of Information at that time. First, do you recall during that day whether there were radio broadcasts that called for Lon Nol government officials to assemble at the Ministry of Information?
I was told later that evening about the broadcast. I was not aware of it earlier. I'm going by what we were told at the Japanese bridge. We were told to report to the ministry. But upon getting off of the truck, the ride that was provided to take us to the ministry, I could see to the right of the building maybe 24 former government officials on the left, and to the right were some Khmer Rouge. One of the Lon Nol regime officers was discussing, trying to make a point or two to the Khmer Rouge. Khmer Rouge were watching. One Khmer Rouge was taking a photo of the journalist getting off the truck. I had a camera hanging around my neck. I didn't raise it to my eye. I had a wide-angle lens. I took a photo just as a person was coming over to grab my camera equipment from me. Took the cameras, 2 cameras, camera bag. But I had just taken the photograph that shows the Ministry of Information, Lon Nol regime, what's left of it, and the Khmer Rouge. The guy took my camera equipment, and after we were told to go to the French embassy, my camera bag was returned with, of all things, my film intact, the 2 cameras. I'm sure if they saw me raise the camera to my face and take the photo, I probably would have lost the film. We were there about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe at the most. Sidney Schonberg, through Dith Pran, was talking to some people. I'm not sure who they were. And then a car came driving up, and out of the car came the last Prime Minister, Long Barrett, and his wife. They came over. There were a couple of Khmer Rouge with them. The guns were not pointed at them, but it was pretty obvious they were prisoners. Sidney Schonberg had a moment to talk with them. I wanted to get a photograph, but not to lose my camera. They turned away, and unfortunately, all I had was a photo of them being walked to the car. A few minutes after Long Barrett and his wife were driven away, we were told to go to the French embassy. We had to report to the French embassy. So on the way to the French embassy was the Hotel Royal, where I stopped in the hotel to get a few things. I had like an emergency survival kit of sorts.
If I can stop you there,
Yes.
I'd like to go back now and ask a few more questions about the time that you were at the Ministry of Information that you've just described, and then we'll go to what happened at the Hotel Phnom after that. And what I'd like to, Mr. President, at this point, we'd like to play a video clip that has been provided to the AV unit. This is a short clip from the film Pol Pot, The Killing Embrace, which is D108/32.2R, item 988 in the list of audio-visual records on Xylab, which has been assigned an E3 number by the Chamber, which is E3/2355R. The film also is identified by an ERN V00172454, and the clip that we have is from the original, runs from 25 minutes and 22 seconds through to 26 minutes and 5 seconds of the original video. This is if we could have the video booth play the entire clip first without sound, and then I will endeavor to have them replay and pause at a certain point. But at this point, if we could play that video clip for the witness to see.
The President, you may proceed. Every booth unit is now advised to ensure that the video clip is now played back as requested.
In a moment, I'm going to ask the video booth to replay and pause at a certain point. One of the photographs here today you've already identified as one of yours. Did you recognize any of the other photographs that were shown in this video clip?
Yes, many of them are my photographs.
And in particular, did you recognize the last photo that was shown for a period of time where there was a group of people and the camera panned from the right to the left on the photo? Did you recognize that photo?
Yes, that is at the location of the Ministry of Information. The camera started panning from the right of my photograph, showing the Khmer Rouge. You saw one Khmer Grahon with the camera taking our photographs, and then as it panned further to the left, you saw La Nol regime officials, and you saw one person making points, trying to bargain, whatever. And that's part of the photograph. The overall photo shows much more of an area. But that is my photograph of the... I consider that a very important historical photograph, a transition. Set the calendar back.
And just so we're clear, is this the photograph that you described taking when you were at the Ministry of Information a few minutes ago, the photograph you took without raising your camera so you wouldn't be noticed?
លោកបានលើកកាមេរ៉ាថតតែអត់ឲ្យគេកត់សម្គាល់ថាលោកបានលើកកាមេរ៉ាថតនោះទេតើអញ្ចឹងដែរទេគឺជារូបថតនឹងហើយ
Yes.
ហើយគឺការចាត់ជារូបថតនឹងមែន
Did you've told us about Long Beret's arrival at that location. Did you recognize any of the other Lon Nol officials who had been gathered at the Ministry of Information?
No. Many look familiar, but as I'm a photographer and I'm not writing and interviewing people, I had no person-to-person contact with many of these people. Or the ones I used to come in contact with had already fled.
To see if I can refresh your recollection, I'd like to read a couple of excerpts from some documents. First, before I do that, let me ask you. You've already indicated that Sidney Schanberg was there during this event. Was Mr. Swain also present at this time?
Yes, regarding going to the Ministry of Information, it was the group of us that were abducted at the Prekhet Milia Hospital, brought to the Japanese bridge, and then told to report to the ministry.
Let me read to you excerpts both first from John Swain's journal, his journal for 17th of April. And this is document E3/51 at English page S00003278, Khmer S00644709, French 00597835. And in his journal, Mr. Swain has the following entry for 4 p.m. on 17th of April. Quote, "There were 50 prisoners lined up in front of the building. They included Lon Non, Marshal Lon Nol's younger brother, and one of the most corrupt, hated members of the old regime. There were several generals and Hu Hong Sin, director of the cabinet of Long Beret," end of quote. And I would also like to read to you an excerpt from an article that was written in May 1975 by Sidney Schanberg titled "The City is Falling." This is document D365/1.1.22, D365/1.1.22 at English 00444900, Khmer 00656314, and French 00664021. And the quote from Mr. Schanberg's article reads as follows, quote, "When we arrived, about 50 prisoners were standing outside the building, among them Lon Non, the younger brother of President Lon Nol, who had gone into exile, and Brigadier General Chim Chun, who was close to the former president. Other generals and cabinet ministers were also there, very nervous but trying to appear untroubled," end of quote. Mr. Rokoff, do either of these excerpts refresh your recollection as to Lon Nol officials who were present at the Ministry of Information when you were there?
Yes, it refreshes my memory. And regarding Lon Nol's brother, Lon Non, I was informed of his presence there much later. At the time, I did not realize the significance of him being there.
នៅពេលនោះគឺខ្ញុំមុនដំបូងខ្ញុំមិនចាំមិនគិតថាគាត់នៅទីនោះទេតែក្រោយមក
And I'd like to ask you just a few questions about the Khmer Rouge soldiers who were present at the Ministry of Information. Do you recall approximately how many Khmer Rouge soldiers were there?
ខ្មែរក្រហមចំនួនប្រហែលជាប្រមាណអ្នកដែរដែលនៅក្នុងក្រសួងនាពេលនោះ
A couple dozen outside the building. I could not tell you how many inside or behind.
ហើយខ្ញុំមិនដឹងថានៅក្នុងទីឬក៏នៅជុំវិញ
Were they armed?
ទេតើទាហាននោះមានអាវុធកាន់កាប់ដែរឬទេ
Yes, but many of the Khmer Rouge there had pistols. Not everybody had AKs.
នោះគឺថាมันមានអាវុធវែងនោះទេមានតែផ្លេត
And did you observe whether, or was there a commander or leader who was speaking on behalf of the Khmer Rouge forces at the Ministry of Information?
និយាយនៅក្រសួងព័ត៌មានពេលនោះនិយាយតំណាងឲ្យខ្មែរក្រហមដែរឬទេ
At the time I took the photograph, the Lon Nol regime official was discussing, making his points, emphasizing some points. Any discussion between the two elements stopped as soon as the foreign journalists were taken off the truck, and we walked over there. And Sidney Schonberg started talking to a Khmer who came up to him and started talking. I don't know the nature of their conversation.
ក៏បានបញ្ជាក់នៅពេលនោះគឺថាមានបុគ្គលម្នាក់ជនជាតិខ្មែរនោះដើរមកជិត Sydney Schonberg ហើយបាននិយាយខ្ញុំថាបាននិយាយ
And Mr. President, if we could at this point, I would like to replay
ខ្ញុំសូមឲ្យចាក់
the same video that we played a few moments ago, and this time pause, if the video booth is able to do this, pause at the 32-second point in the video. So we would request that the same video be replayed, and this time paused at 32 seconds.
ឲ្យធ្វើការចាក់ខ្សែវីដេអូនេះឡើងវិញក៏ប៉ុន្តែឲ្យឈប់ត្រង់ចំណុចលេខ32
The President, you may proceed, and AV booth officers are now instructed to make sure that the video clip is now put up on the screen for display.
Thank you. The individual who's shown in the middle, or close to the middle of this photograph, in front of the photographer, is that the person who you were just referring to, who was speaking on behalf of the Khmer Rouge at this gathering?
និយាយតំណាងឲ្យខ្មែរក្រហមហ្នឹងឬក៏យ៉ាងម៉េច
When I got off the truck and started walking towards the building and I saw those people there, the only one conversing was the Lon Nol official on the left. The guy holding the papers in his left hand, I did not notice him conversing with the other group. As soon as the journalist arrived, whatever was going on between those two groups stopped. And the guy with the paper is not the one who was later talking to Sidney Schonberg. It was someone else.
Thank you for clarifying that. If it's possible to resume the video and this time pause, resume it from the 32-second mark, and this time pause at the 41-second mark, Mr. President, if we could do that.
President, you may proceed. Every booth officer is now instructed to ensure that the portion suggested is put up on display.
Thank you. Now, a few minutes ago, you indicated that there was a representative from the Lon Nol officials who was speaking. Can you identify him at this part of the video clip?
I do not know who that individual is, but he is the one that was conversing with the Khmer Rouge. He was making some points, emphasizing points, like his right hand, the finger hitting the palm of the left hand. He was trying to make a point, and then it all stopped once they saw us coming towards them.
I'd like now to read another excerpt from John Swain's journal regarding this event. This is document E3/51 at English page S00003278, Khmer S00644710, and French 00597835, which reads as follows, quote, "At the Information Ministry, a man in black, about 35, and clearly a leader, bawled through a bullhorn at the prisoners, dividing them into 3 groups: military, political, and ordinary civilians. The Khmer Rouge training their guns on them were tough, strong-looking, in jungle green Mao hats and the inevitable Ho Chi Minh sandals. Each one was a walking arsenal." End of quote. Were you able to observe at the Ministry of Information whether the Lon Nol or whether the people there had been divided into groups?
I could not see where they were divided into groups. I did not see that going on during the brief period we were at the ministry.
Now, you indicated that while you were present, Prime Minister Long Beret arrived at the Ministry of Information. Can you describe his appearance and demeanor when he arrived and surrendered to the Khmer Rouge?
He did not surrender to the Khmer Rouge there. He was brought there by the Khmer Rouge. They took him at a prior location. I mean, I had heard over the next few days stories about it and where he was taken. But anyways, when he was brought to the ministry, he was under their control. I could not see who was driving the car. But anyways, he got out of the car, and then they took him away in the same car, maybe 20 minutes later. I'm not sure of the time frame.
Did you receive any information later as to what happened to Long Beret or the other officials who had been gathered at the Ministry of Information?
I don't think any of us realized immediately after that what happened to them. And when we were told to leave for the French embassy, and those people from the Lon Nol regime were at the ministry, they were taken maybe away north of us, but what happened after that we did not see. I've heard stories about that, but that's another matter. We did not see it ourselves.
What did you hear as to what happened with them?
ទេគ្រាន់តែដឹងថាមានរឿងកើតឡើងចំពោះគាត់សំណួរតើលោកដឹងថាស្ដាប់ឮថាមានអ្វីកើតឡើងចំពោះអ្នកទាំងអស់នោះដែរឬទេ
That they were all marched to the Circle Sportif, which is the site of the current American embassy, where they were bludgeoned to death. That is what we heard.
Do you recall who you heard that from?
No, I can't say we heard it while still in Cambodia. It was much later. And from other sources I'm not aware of.
Mr. President, I'd like now to present and read from a document E3/604. This is a 2nd of November 1975 Bangkok Post article titled "Executions Admitted." And if I may, I'd like to put that on the screen and present a copy to the witness.
The President, you may proceed.
Mr. Rokoff, the document I'm handing you is an article that appeared at the Bangkok Post on the 2nd of November 1975. There is an article titled "Executions Admitted," which includes the following statement, quote, "Deputy Cambodian Prime Minister Ieng Sary confirmed yesterday that 2 top leaders of the former Phnom Penh regime had been executed by the People's Council after the Khmer Rouge victory. The confirmation by Ieng Sary that both former Premier Long Beret and Lon Non, younger brother of former President Lon Nol, had been executed came after several unconfirmed reports earlier filtering out of that country." End of quote. Do you recall being aware of a statement issued by Ieng Sary later in 1975 confirming the executions of Long Beret and Lon Non?
This is the first I saw of this article. Unfortunately, in those days it was difficult to read newspapers from overseas, but I heard of this sometime later. I'm sorry, I can't give you a better answer.
And after you left the Ministry of Information that day, did you ever see Long Beret or Lon Non again?
No.
I want to turn now to what took place after you left the Ministry of Information on the 17th of April, 1975. And you were starting to tell us how you went to the Hotel Phnom. Could you tell us now what happened when you returned to the Hotel Phnom from the Ministry of Information on the 17th of April?
Yes, I picked up sort of an emergency survival kit. I had some vitamins, some food, cans of food, number of things in it. And I'm just going to take that with me to the French embassy. And Sidney Schonberg went to his room to get a few things. I had a lot of junk food and canned food in my bag and a couple of bottles of soda. And Sidney went to his room to get notes, a few other things, and then we walked north towards the French embassy. It was dark. It had just gotten dark. We were told to get to the French embassy by 5 o'clock. We were late, but regardless. And as we're walking towards the French embassy, many hundreds of Khmer Rouge soldiers were marching single file southward on Monivong. So we were passing them. I had taken photos of Khmer Rouge line on the left and the civilians on the right headed north. A few journalists in the group, Dith Prawn, Sydney. We get to the French embassy and climb over the wall. The wall was not very high. It was considerably less than the height of the wall now. Many people going over the walls.
Who was it that had told you to go to the French embassy?
Dith Prawn relayed the order to Sydney and the rest of us. We had to go to the French embassy. There was that was the word given to us at the Ministry of Information. At the Japanese bridge, we had no idea what would happen next. We were told to go to the Ministry of Information, and there we were told to go to the French embassy.
Mr. President, I see it's almost noon. To give you, I estimate I have another half hour, possibly 45 minutes of questions. And as I said, we will look over the photographs that were sent by DC Cam to see if there's any additional photographs that may be used with the witness.
The President, thank you. We would like to also be advised as to how much time the lead co-lawyers would need to put questions to the witness, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I believe that I will not need any longer than 45 minutes at the maximum. Thank you.
The President, thank you, Counsel. Counsel for Mr. Kiew Samphan, you may now proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Good morning to you. Good morning to all distinguished members of the bench and to all parties. I have a request to put forward on behalf of my client, Mr. Kiew Samphan. As you understand and are well aware, he has just departed from the hospital, and he has deployed significant effort to participate in this morning's proceedings because it is very important for him to be here and to listen to the witness testimony. However, he has just conveyed to me some of his difficulties in remaining seated and some of the adverse effects of his bronchitis. Therefore, he would wish to follow the remainder of today's proceedings in the holding cell. Once again, I would emphasize that Mr. Kiew Samphan is particularly interested in attending these proceedings and participating actively in his defense. However, today it is particularly difficult, and he would therefore respectfully request that he follow the proceedings from the holding cell, and that he be monitored by his treating doctors. If this is possible, we shall be submitting the necessary documentation in accordance.
The President, thank you. Co-prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Yes, Mr. President. Of course, we have no objection to that request. I'm rising just to clarify a matter. My colleague tells me that the amount of time I indicated in English that I needed 30 to 45 minutes. He informed me that in Khmer it was only translated to 30 minutes. So I wanted to make sure that the court understood that we are seeking probably 30 to 45 minutes to finish.
The President, the Chamber has noted the request by the co-prosecutor for additional time granted to put questions to the witness. And the Chamber has also noted that the questions have been put and the responses have been made which are relevant to the events that happened that the witness bore witness to, and the facts that are relevant to the first segment of the trial. And due to this need, the Chamber therefore grants such additional time to both the co-prosecutor and the lead co-lawyers for the civil parties to put questions to the witness until the first section or session of the afternoon before the first adjournment. And the Chamber at the same time also notes the request made by counsel for Mr. Khieu Samphan, requesting that Mr. Khieu Samphan be excused and that he be allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell due to his health concerns, as he has just been recently discharged from the hospital. The Chamber therefore grants such request, and that Mr. Khieu Samphan is now permitted to observe the proceedings from his holding cell through for the entire remainder of the day. And Mr. Khieu Samphan is now instructed to submit his waiver given thumbprint or signed by Mr. Khieu Samphan. The AV booth officers are now instructed to ensure that the holding cell where Mr. Khieu Samphan will retire to momentarily will be well connected so that Mr. Connected to the AV audio visual equipment so that he can observe the proceedings from there. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Khieu Samphan to his cell. The court is adjourned.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ